And thank you for coming to this evening's meeting. Before I start, I'm sure you'll want to join me in congratulating Jane McSherry on her appointment as Director of Children's Schools and Families. Congratulations, and we look forward to absolutely fabulous work from you. You've set yourself a good track record. We want it progressing. Thank you very much. I'd also like to congratulate Elizabeth on your appointment to Assistant Director of Children's Schools and Families. And you don't know it, but a friend of mine worked closely with you in Wandsworth and she speaks very highly of you. So we know you've started, or in your few years here, it's gone well. So again, we expect it to continue. And so we have an absolutely cracking department. And could I say to Ros, welcome. I haven't met you before because I had a year off. And it's lovely to be back. So welcome and thank you for coming. We'll go through apologies for absence. There's one from Ed Foley, but I think he's going to join us.
We have another one for James Holmes.
Oh, right, and James. Can I just add that Ed's wife is really not quite well at the moment, so that's his priority. So there's Ed and James. Yeah. Is there a substitute for James?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yes, Chair, there isn't a substitute on this occasion, I'm afraid. It's Hayley. I'm on the screen in front of you.
Oh, hi, Hayley.
Yeah, my apologies for not being there in person. I did discuss it with Jane, but I've been suffering from a really bad cold with a hacking cough. And so we didn't want to concern anybody else in the chamber, even though I have done several lateral flow tests for COVID, but just as a precaution.
Yeah, we've all got to look after ourselves and each other.
And other people.
Fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. I think that's everybody in now, is that right?
Chair? Sorry, it's Hayley.
Sorry.
Yeah. Would you mind reminding people who are in chamber to speak via microphone, otherwise we can't hear what's being said?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That was
we
we can hear you fine.
Own.
Yes. So
yes, as Hayley just said,
if
you we have to use our mic, so we can't all hear. And it's the bottom row, the little silver button. If you press it on to speak and off when you're not speaking, so we can hear other people. And just to make sure the people via Zoom can hear us. Right, thank you for that. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? No, thank you. And has anyone, do you all agree the minutes of the last meeting? Agreed. Has anyone got any matters arising from it? Right, thank you. We'll first of all go to Dagmar for her update on the COVID-19 in Merton. Is she? Oh, I beg your pardon. Julie Groom, I'm so sorry. I'm so used to being at Dagmar. I'm a bit behind. Apologies, Julie. And welcome. Thank you very much. And over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So my name is Julia Groom. I'm a consultant in public health and I'm here on behalf of Dagmar, who is on annual leave today. If I share my screen, if that's okay. I understand that Stella has shared some slides with you in advance, but if I just pull these up, so if you just bear with me a moment. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
If I make that there, is that better? Great. So I wanted to give a brief overview of the current position and situation with COVID in the borough, with a particular focus on children and young people and the return to school. Since we put these slides together, there have been some data updates, so I'll refer to those, but I was just going to give a fairly short overview and then open for questions, if that's okay. So really not going to read through these, but just to give some of the headline messages. Up until recently, the rates of COVID within the borough were at about 200 per 100,000 of the population. Within the past week, we have seen increases. So the last position was 265 per 100,000. So although over time our numbers have gone down, we are now seeing an upturn, and that's being monitored very closely. That, to some extent, is driven by the increase we're seeing in school-aged children since the return to school. So we've particularly seen an increase in numbers among 5 to 16-year-olds. And the latest position on that, looking at our latest numbers, is that for children aged 5 to 10 years in the week ending the 25th of September, there were a rate of 580 per 100,000, which is just under 100 new cases. And for 11 to 16-year-olds, there was 790, a rate of 790 per 100,000, which is 108 new cases. So we can see the return to school has had a significant impact on the increase in those school-aged children. What we have seen is a decline in the high rates of COVID among the older young people, so that's sort of 17 to 24-year-olds, which were very high over the summer. But we are expecting there may well be a rise in those rates also when as young people are returning to university and college. We've seen a number of outbreaks in schools since the return of school. So we have seen in the first week back 4 outbreaks, 5 in the following week, and in the most recent week another 5. So that's a total of 14 outbreaks in schools, nurseries and other young settings since the return of school. In terms of testing, the testing using PCR tests has been higher among the sort of 17 to 24-year-olds. We also had high rates of LFT, that's the rapid testing for young people at school in early September, when there was on-site testing in schools when schools returned. That has now dropped somewhat when we've returned to home testing. So we need to work hard to make sure we are encouraging families and young people to continue testing, because it's recently been announced that schools are being encouraged to promote testing at least until the end of this term. Moving on to vaccinations. So there has been access to vaccination, a 1 dose of the Pfizer for 16 to 17-year-olds. And so far, just over 1,500 16 to 17-year-olds in Merton have had that vaccination. We are pushing to increase that number. That's about 35% of the population. And we're also seeing, we've seen, the numbers of 18 to 29-year-olds is just under 1,700. And again, we are working hard to promote uptake in that age group, because it is still lower than the older age groups. In terms of impact on hospital, one of the key national measures is around ensuring that the NHS isn't overwhelmed and how well our NHS is coping. We have seen some increases in admissions in South West London, but not to the same extent of previously. I think the challenge is the NHS is very busy with lots of other issues, other respiratory issues, catching up on backlog cases. You may have seen in the press, the pressure around cancer treatments, for example. So I think any increase in hospital admission through COVID would have a significant impact on that. And finally, thankfully, the number of deaths since the spring this year has remained relatively low, and that I think is really showing the positive impact of the vaccination programme. So I'll quickly go through, if I may, the data slides, but I won't go through them in detail, but very happy to take questions on any detail within them. So this set of slides basically shows us that we're not seeing a gap in the, we're seeing roughly the same rates between East and West Merton in the rates of COVID. And we're also seeing that Merton is following the same trend as the whole of Southwest London. Moving on, again, this just gives the detail of the position regarding our age-specific rates and that increase in our 5 to 16-year-olds. This is also reporting our outbreaks, as I've highlighted, and you'll see from this table that schools, nurseries and education settings are really the focus of our outbreaks at the moment, and outbreaks are very low in other settings across the borough, which is obviously good news. Here again, you can see our testing rate. If you look at the chart on the right, you'll see the peak. This was when schools were doing on-site testing. You can see how that then dips when we return to home testing for schools. And again, this is the rapid LFD testing. This shows our vaccination rates. You can see the grey area shows those groups that are unvaccinated. And so obviously lots of work to be done regards to vaccination. There are new programs being rolled out at the moment. So we are about to launch, the NHS is about to launch a schools-based vaccination program for universally for 12 to 15-year-olds. In Merton, we're expecting that to start within our schools in early October. And obviously that will make a significant difference in terms of uptake among that age group. We also are working to support our NHS colleagues in a targeted vaccination programme for young people aged 12 to 17 who are at much greater risk of serious illness from COVID and who will be offered 2 Pfizer vaccines. And we have a webinar, for example, that we are doing with Kids First next week to really reassure parents and inform parents about that programme. So moving, just to say that on the right of this slide, you can also see geographically uptake by age. And the general picture is that we're still seeing higher levels of uptake of vaccination in the west of the borough. This slide just really sets out the issues for the NHS. So if you look at bed occupancy, which is on the top left-hand side, you can see that we have high rates of bed occupancy. That's not from COVID, that is general bed occupancy. And so if we see, though, any significant increase in COVID, that's going to have a significant knock-on effect on the NHS ability to cope. And this slide really just shows you the low number of deaths that we've had attributable to COVID since spring this year, which is obviously, positive to see. Finally, if I may, I just wanted to highlight some of the changes that have happened in schools since September. So there have been lots of changes to the guidance for schools in how they operate, with a real push to maximise education and learning time and minimise the disruption to schools. So particular changes include that there's no requirement to self-isolate if someone lives in the same household as someone who's tested positive, if they're under 18 and 6 months, or they've had both COVID vaccinations. And that is really aiming to keep as many young people and staff in school as possible. Schools are still implementing some control measures as routine. That includes ventilation, cleaning, and hand washing. So that there are measures that are still being implemented. I've touched on testing. Perhaps if I may just say a few words about outbreaks. So outbreak thresholds have changed. And so we have been using the national guidance very, very closely to support our schools. We've been working with the Public Health England London team, the London Coronavirus Resource Centre, to support schools, and we have been supporting them in their decision making about when they feel they need to increase their control measures during an outbreak. So the kind of things that some schools where they've had larger outbreaks have been looking at is reducing crowds, reducing mixing of staff and pupils, limiting visits and trips. And then there is a further level of measures that would only be considered under very sort of difficult circumstances, as a last resort, which might include return to on-site testing or attendance restrictions, but they're very much being seen as the last resort and would only be done in consultation with local Director of Public Health and Public Health England and our schools. So I think that probably two other points I just wanted to finish on, if I may. In addition to the support around outbreaks measures at the moment, we're also working with schools on a COVID resilience project. So that is aiming to embed the skills and knowledge around infection prevention, control and resilience within the school. And we are supporting schools over the next 12 months to really help them do that and to have a named member of staff who can work proactively around those issues as well. We're also doing work with our young inspectors. So we have a Young COVID Champions project that has been working with young adults, but also is doing a lot of work with our schools and with the youth parliamentarians to really promote awareness of COVID in schools. And for example, they are working on at this moment a video which is about promoting the schools-based vaccination programme. So I'll stop there and very happy to take any questions.
Julia, thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions? If I can remind you, I can see those, but just here I have to keep turning. So if I don't see you, just call out chair and I will add you to the list. Has anyone got any questions, please? Omar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Julia, for your presentation. My question was very minor. It was in relation to the statistics for the number of outbreaks in schools. Do we know which 5 schools have had those outbreaks?
Yes, we do. So in total there are, since return of school there are 14. We have a system where we have an online reporting system where schools can report their cases to us, and we can track how closely they're reaching that outbreak threshold. And then as soon as we think they're nearing the threshold, make contact to ensure we're discussing any measures that they might need to take. And then working, we have a team of infection prevention control coordinators and another member of my team who are working sort of daily with schools to help them manage any situations in the school. So yeah, we're very aware of which schools have outbreaks.
Thank you.
Mansour, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Julia, for the school overview in Merton. I've got one question. How many of 16 to 17 years old still have left from receiving vaccination? And what is the plan of Merton to complete the vaccination program for this age? Thank you.
So, thank you. So for 16 to 17-year-olds, we have, so I'm just trying to get the data. I haven't got the data at my fingertips, but I would say about 35% of 16 to 17-year-olds are vaccinated. They've had their 1 dose. So that clearly means there's about 65% that aren't yet vaccinated. What we are doing is really trying to work with our young inspectors, and our COVID champions to promote vaccination among that age group. The route of getting vaccination is different, so it's not school-based for that age group. They can access most other vaccination sites. So we are very we are promoting all the vaccination opportunities whenever there is an outbreak situation in school. We're sharing that information regularly with schools. Our CCG colleagues do regular communications and campaigns. So, and we're also hoping to do some further engagement work with young people to really try and promote those messages. I mean, feedback from our from my CCG colleagues who are actually doing the vaccination clinics is that a lot of young people that age have actually been really positive about getting their vaccination. So we're hoping that message, that they're giving the message to their peers, and that will also help increase our numbers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Julia, can I say thank you very much? I do get sent those that data in the form you've just explained, and I found it very useful for you to explain it, because the slides are quite small when I see them, and it has been very helpful, your explanation. I don't know if everybody here gets them, or is there anyone here who wants them, who hasn't got them? Who should they contact? Julia?
Oh, I can send out those slides. That's if you want to contact me. Then.
Chair.
Does anybody want them at all?
Chair, it's Hayley here. Yeah.
Oh, hi, Hayley.
Hi, all councillors receive those slides. They usually come
Do
on
they?
a Friday.
I didn't know if
Yeah.
everybody did.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
I know I get them.
Yeah,
Okay.
they come on a Friday.
Yes, yeah, but I had to ask for them when I asked for more detail. So perhaps everyone now gets them. Okay, thank you. Julia, then that's fine, we'll get them. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation and explanation. And it has been appreciated by us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The next one is agenda item 5, school places planning strategy. And Tom, we're over to you, please.
Yep. Okay. So if I do a brief introduction to this, I mean, pre-pandemic, we generally reported every year or so about the state of play in terms of supply and demand for school places. But this is the first time for many years we've actually put together a more formal strategy document. And I think a lot of that is due to a lot of the concerns from primary schools in particular, where they are experiencing and have experienced a quite significant fall in the role, which has undoubtedly been exacerbated greatly by the Brexit factors and COVID combined, I think is the best way to summarize it. So, I mean, the paper background talks about how we had this huge increase that we met. And so in the last, well, basically since 2017, numbers have started to fall. And we've already dealt with it in a number of ways by reducing forms of entry. So we're actually 10.5 forms of entry reduced in terms of admission numbers over the last 3 or 4 years. But we are aware that's only at the start of it. It depends on which model you look at, but we are probably looking in the region of about 10 forms of entry reduction for over the next few years on top. The document, and I refer you to 2.11 of the paper, outlines our broad strategy in terms of primary school places, where we want to encourage schools to increase admission numbers to sensible numbers of 30, which makes it easy to manage, to fit in with the key stage 1 class sizes, maximum of 30. Yet you want highest class sizes, or clearly it's with money coming from pupils, it becomes difficult to manage the finances of the school. We'd like schools to do this in clusters, to do it at an area level, to do it in a sensible way. The use of spare accommodation with the linking of SEND additional resource provision being needed can be a means to use that accommodation properly. And there's management of schools. Clearly, when schools become softer, schools working together, hard and soft federations and such like, can be a means to make things more viable. We do say here at the bottom, there's no plans to close schools. That certainly is something we would actually want to avoid. But the following paragraph talks about there being some circumstances where that can't be ruled out as something that might happen in the future, but certainly not something we are planning on. We're aware that secondary schools are highest numbers for well, probably forever since our reorganization in the turn of the century. But clearly those lower numbers in primary will reach secondary school, and that will be in the next 2 to 3 years. Because we saw some of this coming, our secondary expansion program was far more modest, and therefore the reduction would be less drastic. Again, depends on the model, between 3 and 8 forms eventually. And again, we're thinking that use of SEN with the growth in SEN could be a means to do that, and we'll need to discuss with our secondary head teachers how that might be the best way of managing that. At the same time, we have the biggest increase in special school provision. Paragraph 2.23 shows what I think you'll be aware of from other committee reports, just about how extensive the rise in the HCPs are, how we've increased places hugely. I think almost doubling number of special school places once Watley Avenue is taken into account, half as much again as ARPS, but that doesn't seem to be enough. And so we are looking, as part of our overall safety valve discussions with the DfE, what we're going to do, but we are very much likely to have to, as part of that overall package, to increase special school places. I'll take it, just any questions people have.
Thank you. Anyone got any questions? Dennis, then. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting. And Hayley, I apologise, Hayley.
That's okay. Don't worry. If I can see which way you're looking there, Chair. So
Yes, it's
I
difficult.
I can see
So,
you.
if we can just all start with very succinct questions with Dennis, Omar, and then Hayley. And Tom, are you happy to take them in threes to give your answers? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Russell, you're a fourth on the list. Are you happy to do that, or do you want to
Yes, certainly.
individually?
Elizabeth is there for more school improvement related questions.
Yeah, well, we've got Elizabeth and Jane as well. Yeah. Please.
All right, thank you, Chair. I've got the same question to 2.7, 2.8 and 220, and that is, knowing that these cuts are in children numbers are coming, are we going to, in all schools, to be able to protect their budgets? Because as we all know, the children, money follows the children, and if the children figures are dropping, are some schools going to struggle with their budgets? And also at number 20, there's a comment about council meeting ambitious housing targets resulting in child yield. I think, judging by the way every borough in London is struggling for homes for everybody, I can't see that being a realistic way to look at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. My question is in reference to 2.13 and why we are allowing schools to decide, and shouldn't it be the council's responsibility to decide those numbers and places rather than leaving it to the schools?
Hayley.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for your report as well. I have a question. I have a couple of questions, so I'll keep it succinct for now, Chair, and perhaps you can come back to me later as we go through the report. Section 2.5. I mean, it was pretty much known that the massive increase in primary school provision, that was actually a bubble at the time. And do you think that in hindsight, perhaps more temporary accommodation should have been provided? And in addition to that question, what was the cost of all of the increased primary provision at that point in time? And regard to 2.11, which is in terms of the strategy, why wasn't there a strategy in place before now, knowing that that was a bubble at that time? And would it be possible to see a more detailed strategy? Because what we've actually got in the report is 5 lines of single sentences. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to start on this, and you chip in as you feel appropriate.
Do you want to take the budget question, or do you want me to? Okay, you'll start off. Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a national funding formula, and so we need to make it work with schools. We can't just subsidise schools which have got difficult numbers. So schools have got the difficult challenge of us, as I said in the strategy, of trying to help if we can to make admission numbers easier so that it's easier to manage the right size of classes. But otherwise, we are clearly talking about mixed aid classes or those schools organising. And as we put in the strategy also, you know, the possibility of the schools are smaller, sharing resources at the management level, hence the federation type aspects, which already work successfully, you know, example being the single gate William Morris Lonesome model. So no, we can't protect school budgets. We haven't got that money. It's a national fund in terms of putting money out, but we have to work with schools at strategies that allow them to meet those budgets. The second one about the child yield and the ambitions, yes, I think that's why I phrased that in that way, and why I looked at the GLA model and our own local models, which are more pessimistic and directing us towards probably thinking that the pessimism might be the more realistic one. I think that is probably true, and which is why we are slightly sceptical, rather like the GLA also forecast a lot more growth, even at the growth times. Next question is about whether schools or the council should decide. We have certain statutory powers as a local authority, some more over some schools than others. We have more power over community schools. Voluntary aided schools can set their own admission number, and academies we have no control over whatsoever. So we are in a market we need to manage as well as possible, and therefore need to work in partnership with our schools. Clearly there can be some enforcement if necessary at certain times, and that could be the case if clearly school improvement and budget is a very severe concern. But I think it has to be something that we have to work in partnership, because that's really the role of the local authority at the moment. In terms of hindsight, hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Certainly pre-2016, we were in a world where everything was about growth, migration, and everyone was very concerned. We did stop our expansion program and did reverse decisions and did do temporary classrooms towards the end, and there was a couple of things we reversed. We weren't helped by a free school on top as well, that exacerbated it. Probably, I'm sure there would be a few of them, but there is still a lot of our more expensive expansions in the Wimbledon area. There still is a very strong demand for that area. So some of our less expensive ones are where we refurbished accommodation, and we didn't actually put so much investment into it. I'm afraid I can't give you a figure in terms of what we spent on the total schools expansion programs, but yes, clearly it was into the tens of millions of pounds. That was largely funded though from government basic needs, which supported what was permanent accommodation. In terms of the last question about a strategy before now and why it's in single sentences, I think we've had a strategy before, but I suppose this sets it out in a more formal way. Previously, it was an expansion strategy. Then there was some periods of stability, and now I suppose because this is a more serious consideration where it's not just reducing some admission numbers, there is a need to be clear on that strategy. I think those bullet points are just a headline of what will be a lot of work, and the implementation that comes behind it is really the big thing behind it, and that's what we want to do, and that's the next stage of it in terms of consulting with all our schools, so at both cluster level in terms of the heads of the clusters, and then with all primary schools where we have a meeting planned as a major item in the agenda in the next about 3 weeks, I think.
Tom, Jane or Elizabeth, did you want to add anything?
I'd probably just add, so I think hindsight would be really difficult. So actually, I think all the way through we've tried to be pragmatic in the numbers. So the GLA forecasts have always looked high, and so we have always, if you like, been on the more pessimistic side of what we've done. So that's been going on for a number of years. We do need to work in partnership with our schools, and schools, so generally with their governing bodies, will be deciding what they think is the best way to manage things. They will discuss that with us, and they certainly discuss it with Elizabeth and her team, and we would flag if we thought there was a school improvement issue around that planning, but in general the strategies they use are effective for that school at that time, and we can't have a kind of blanket strategy because different things work for different schools. And in terms of the broad strategy that's outlined, so actually we've been working with schools over a number of years on looking for individual schools, and the roles might fall in different schools for different reasons. So we know, for example, we've had some schools where the school requires improvement, and that might lead to a fall in roles, and so we sort of manage those in different ways. What we've got now is what looks like more of a crisis building up, that has built up more since Brexit was agreed to, since COVID, since we've had more movement out of London, and all of those things are exacerbating the situation, which has been particularly bad this year with COVID. So all of those things make it a very difficult science. It's not an exact science. It's so I guess it's just to reassure that actually all the time we are monitoring and looking at that. And when we have the increase, it's like our secondary increase, we have to provide enough places for children so that they have a school place. And as Tom said, actually, the expansion did, if you like, slow down, was temporary buildings towards the end when it looked as if that, even our sort of adjustment of the GLA forecast were looking very positive in terms of numbers.
Chair, I just wanted to add something, I suppose, really around the budget question that Councillor Pearce raised, because the work that we do with schools is going to be very important to encourage them to be proactive about managing pupil places and the staffing that goes with it. So this strategy is going to be, we are, as Tom said, consulting with our head teachers, but on that individual basis to bring into the picture the apologies, that was a little bit noisy, is to bring into the picture not just the pupil numbers, but what we know about the budget and what we know about the school improvement issues for individual schools as well.
Thank you. Russell, then Nick, please.
Thank you for the report, Tom. I've got 2 questions at the originally. Do you have an idea why the number of SEN children has dramatically increased over the past few years? That's one question. The other one is, on page 16, you talk about the GLA projections were used as Council's official forecast submitted to the DfE. Shouldn't that have been the other one that was submitted to the DfE, because it's going to put us in a, if there's money available, it's going to put us in a better light, saying the GLA has got it wrong and we've got more numbers than they have.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm proud to say that I was chair of this committee when Debbie Shears was the cabinet member for education, which is when this huge school expansion was first, numbers was first realised, and where she actually began the plan for school expansion, and there was absolutely no mention at the time of it being a bubble of any sort. I'm concerned at the imbalance of surplus in net capacity shown on page 19, you know, from between 4.6% right the way up to 22.5%, 23%. I'm very aware that the PA5 area has a very large Eastern European contingent. I'd like to know, are children currently being educated, being withdrawn from the schools to leave the country? And of course, are new children not coming in on the same basis? And how will the schools adapt to that change in population if it is that rapid? Thanks.
And Omar has one, please.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned by our fellow councillor in relation to the increased demand in SEN that we've seen recently, and in relation to the point on 212 where we discuss obviously us not wanting to close schools, and I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to close schools, but I think we need an alternative use to be found, and I feel like the SEN, and that we need an SEN strategy so that we can accommodate for that growing space and demand. So that may be our solution to our potential problem.
Thank you, Tom.
Who's going to ask the massive SEN question? I think that's one for Jane.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to give you the definitive answer to why there's a big increase in pupils with special educational needs, because that is right across the country. We're seeing that increase, and over a period of time that will be for a number of reasons. So that's because the age range for children in receipt of an education, health and care plan moved from 5 to 18 to 0 to 25. So inevitably we're going to see a larger number of children in that cohort, and we've got very few who are coming off the end, if you like, at 25. So over a period of time we will see more of that, but at the moment a very small number. I think it's 11 next year that will come off. So you can see it's a very small proportion of the total number of children with special education needs and disabilities. There clearly is a piece of work across the whole system that is around rebalancing that system, holding as many children as we possibly can at SEND support within mainstream schools, keeping as many children with education, health and care plans as we can in those mainstream schools, or in additionally resource provisions within mainstream schools, so at the sort of least restrictive provision, if you like, and then increasing the number of our special schools or special school places within the borough. So we have had a strategy over a period of time increasing those places, and I think councillors are absolutely right, and hopefully that comes across in this report, that one of the things that we're already looking at and that we'll continue to look at is using that spare capacity in our schools to look at other additionally resource provisions. But we do have to be careful where we're placing those. We want to place them in schools that have got the leadership capacity and ability to take those provisions on board. We constantly look at what the greatest need is, so we've certainly increased our additional resource provision around children with autistic spectrum disorder. We know that we may look at, we've increased the number of special school places around children with social, emotional, and mental health needs, because we can see that's what's coming through. So there's also a balance about what the additional resource provisions are for the primary need to which we'd put those in place. But it absolutely is part of our the expansion of our SEND provision, which has been going on over a number of years, to use some of that spare capacity. Absolutely. I think hopefully that answered some of your, without being able to tell you exactly where all those children, why there's an increase nationally.
Okay, and the other two non-SEN questions about why we didn't use the GLA forecast and our return to the DFE. We actually used a bit of a hybrid, I think it says in there. So for the first couple of years, we did keep to our model and our intelligence from school admissions, because we know from the admissions applications that overrid all models what we're expecting for this September, because I think of the COVID factor. So we did use an element, but we've always used the GLA in the past as as an independent forecasting tool to use. In terms of Nick's question about concerns in that sort of Mitcham area about schools adapting and leaving the country, I mean, yeah, we are aware that that area is most hit and has been, and is the greatest concern to have a look at. Do you want to answer any questions in terms of what schools are doing, Elizabeth, or?
Yes, I can probably come in there in terms of numbers of children who are leaving our schools. So we had a certain amount 2 years ago, pre-COVID. It dropped during COVID, as you might expect, because you've got fewer children, families moving out at that point in particular, but it is back up to the previous high just before COVID. And, you know, there are a good number of children actually coming in and taking their places, but the churn that schools are experiencing is quite significant. And how they manage that is really very important, of course. So we're talking to schools there, and schools are very aware. Induction processes for new children, ensuring that there are clear assessment processes in place if there is suspected special educational need. And you talked, I think, Councillor Draper, about adapting to the change in population. Schools are used to looking at that data and then thinking about what do they need to do, obviously, in terms of their development plans, and thinking about how maybe staffing might need to be adapted to respond to change in population.
Have you answered? Has everyone felt their questions have been answered? Sorry. And I looked, Hayley.
Yeah, I've got a very quick question because I know that obviously time's ticking on. I did actually find that on page 19, which is the primary schools planning area, which shows a surplus against net capacity and against reception year admission numbers for 2020-21, incredibly informative. And I do think it would be worthwhile having this for secondary as well, as a minimum on an annual basis for this level of detail, so we can actually see that movement and the effects going through to secondary.
Sorry, are you talking about asking us to put secondary schools into planning areas?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, as a rule, we've never planned on a, whilst it's useful to
Tom, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't specifically have to be planning areas. It has to be more about the capacity within the secondary school as we go through. Because you said before about, wouldn't it be, I've heard it about 2 or 3 times now, wouldn't hindsight be a great thing? This is actually data. So particularly if you're seeing the crunch within primary schools as it stands, and you've actually got that, I know that they're bunched and clustered into a planning area by the different primary schools. If you don't want to go by planning area, then at least have the data by the secondary schools, particularly in terms of their capacity as we go forwards. And then we don't have to rely on hindsight because we've got the data in front of us.
We can certainly give it to you by secondary school, and clearly the on page 25 you have that data for all the secondary schools. But yeah, and we can certainly discuss with you if you'd like it displayed in a slightly more granular detail. But planning areas is difficult when you effectively have almost regional schools. For example, Ursuline and Wimbledon College actually have as many non-Merton residents, so it's not even a school for for just Merton residents, and pupils travel all across the borough. So you sensibly can only plan on a borough-wide basis. But if you want more detail, then we can certainly discuss what you'd like in the future, and I'd be happy to provide it.
I am aware because I do live in central Wimbledon, so I know in terms of where people do actually travel from, particularly for some of the boroughs' very good schools, and with the subjects that they concentrate on, I do think more granular detail rather than just for the borough would be good to have, please.
Chair, I'm not absolutely sure that my question about the surplus against capacity was it actually answered. You've got on that page 19 thing that Hayley was referring to there, you can see that there's a 7% surplus in Wimbledon, a 4.5% surplus in the Morden area, but there's a 23% surplus in the Mitcham area, Mitcham and Colliers Wood area. And I mean, I can't see that all those places are suddenly all coming back. I mean, where would they be coming back from, and why was there such a difference in the first place? That's the thing. I mean, why was there only a 4.5% lack in Morden as compared to a 23% lack in surplus? Sorry, in Mitcham. Is there an explanation?
I mean, firstly, if you look at the second column, you can see we've reduced the admission numbers already at a number of those schools where there are some bigger schools. So if you actually look at the reception, it was only 10% last year. So you can see that some of that work has been done already, and we do have some bigger schools in that planning area where they happily can revert back being to 2 forms of entry and have already, Thomas and Canterbury being the notable one, Liberty also in that group, and Orange Park. It just does seem to be a less stable area. That planning area, 4 area of those schools has been relatively stable. It didn't get quite the same growth, and it hasn't had the same reduction. If you look at those schools, we didn't actually expand any of them either. So it's a bit of an oddity in that area where it just has been a bit more of a stable population, and some of the town centres I think have been affected more greatly. But clearly Wimbledon has been more robust, but there are still schools which are traditionally less popular in Wimbledon which have also suffered.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Picking up on Russell's question, which I was going to ask about special educational needs. On page 28, it does say that the DfE have not kept pace with with current costs, and the dedicated school grant, I assume, is suffering because of that. And there is going to be meetings with the DfE, but is there any realistic chance that we will get enough financial support extra to cover what is going to be quite a large cost, I would suggest?
I'll pick that one up. So we haven't had the first meeting yet to start that negotiation, but obviously it is a negotiation, so it will be, I think, in that discussion. So clearly one of the points we will be making is that there is a shortfall of funding in terms of the expansion of the age range and the number of pupils, but they clearly will be looking for what we're going to do as well, which we'll be able to talk about the expansion of our school places, about the work we're doing with schools around trying to hold children at SEND support. But it is a negotiation, so we would hope that in that conversation we look at what the council will do to support and what the DfE might do to support us with that growing problem.
Are there any other questions from anyone? Russell?
Thank you for the report again. It's very comprehensive. However, it seems from reading it that it's as from next year, really. So what's going to happen to schools this year, and what plans are the LA put into place to help the schools with the low numbers? Because, I mean, we've talked about budgets, and I know budgets are fixed by basically government because it's children on seats, but is there any other sort of support that the council can give to the schools? I mean, for example, I'm chair of governance Hazelmere, and Hazelmere is 77 places we've got this year, which is quarter of the pupils that we would expect to be in the school, which is an awfully big amount. And it's a lot of money to lose on that sort of basis. Also, the other thing that appears is that when you do the head teacher's appraisal and the head teacher's pay and things like that, that's based on, one of the figures it's based on is the number of children in school. So if you've got a head teacher who's getting for some money for having, say, 700 children in the school, and that number's got down to 400, they're in a different category, and they're going to lose that money.
Shall I take that one, Chair? Thank you, Russell. Support for schools this year. The discussions with individual schools will involve discussions with governors as well. And what we will be encouraging schools to do is to look at staffing models, because the greatest budget commitment within schools is with staff. We'll be encouraging them to look at curriculum models as well, to see how that could be adapted. I think Tom mentioned the idea of maybe needing to discuss whether mixed age classes might be appropriate, which is obviously not always popular with parents. But can be managed well. I have known it managed well, and it is something that we would work carefully with schools on. So it's exploring through the pupil number data, through the budget data, what options might be available for individual schools in their particular circumstances. Your particular point about head teacher pay is a very interesting one, because yes, as schools reduce in size, their group size will drop, and at some point there will need to be discussions with governors. But of course, it's about identifying what group size the school is in, and therefore what leadership pay range is appropriate for the head teacher. But again, it is not a sudden discussion. It is a discussion over time, and there will be protected pay anyway in the first instance. No.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from anyone? Could I just ask one? I was listening to a report on the radio today. I didn't catch it all, but they were talking about the up and coming teacher shortage, and a figure of 28,000 was bandied around. And I just wondered, with, as you were saying, some were returning because of Brexit, and obviously some of those parents would be teachers, so they would have gone as well. And are we having difficulty recruiting just classroom teachers at this stage at all?
So recruitment was an issue about 3 or 4 years in Merton schools. That situation seems to have got better over the past 3 or 4 years, and so the majority of schools would not be reporting such issues at the moment. But it's obviously something we're going to have to keep a close eye on, as you say, if the numbers are not necessarily coming through. What I would just highlight for members' information is we do have in the local area our Teach Wimbledon partnership between schools, which is a very positive way of ensuring that student teachers convert to great NQTs who want to work in Merton.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, Tom, thank you very much for your report, and thank you to you, Jane and Elizabeth, for your responses to our questions. Thank you. You're welcome to leave if you wish, but you're welcome to stay if you prefer to stay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the departmental update. And Carl, are you leading on this? Have I got that right?
Not on the departmental update. I'll defer to Jane on that one. And
Right,
I'll come in on the
okay.
performance.
Can I just come back? Russell?
Information we've just given about the school places going to go next, because there's a meeting of sorts in October.
So the strategy is going to, I think it's going to go to head teachers. So there are major strategic meetings of primary and secondary head teachers coming up over the next few weeks. The paper has also been shared, or if it hasn't been shared, is about to be shared with chairs of governors. And the suggestion that chairs may wish to discuss that, the pertinent points with their governing boards as needed, and also with their head teachers, and to feedback through that process.
What's the outcome of it? Is it going to go to be a policy document for the council?
Yes, it is. It is a strategy.
So the point is, it's going for consultation to head teachers and governors at this stage. Yeah.
May I ask what is going to consultation, because whoever was asking didn't have the microphone switched on?
The strategy that we've just been discussing. So the
Okay.
place planning strategy.
Okay. Just please put the microphones on so we can hear.
Yes, it's a good point, Hayley, but I think it just came up afterwards. And sometimes if people turn sideways, the mic doesn't pick it up.
That's fair
so
enough.
We need to speak into our mics as well. Thank you. Item 6, departmental update.
Apologies. That's fine. Poor Carl was feeling he had to. Okay, so I just wanted to do a brief introduction. So you'll see from the departmental update on that that it's been a busy 5 months for my first 5 months as a DCS in Merton. So we've done quite a lot of recruitment. So we talked last meeting about the recruitment of the MSCP chair, and today we had our first full partnership meeting of the safeguarding partnership with our new chair. So that was a very good meeting. So we talked last time about the interim assistant directors. So I still have both of those interim assistant directors with me, but also the permanent recruitment of assistant directors. So Elizabeth took over as the permanent assistant director last Monday. And we have an interim head of school improvement called Rachel Bowerman. So it's been a very busy time recruiting senior managers and a very successful recruitment. And the permanent recruitment for our assistant director for children's social care and youth inclusion, Diraj Chibba, will be starting with us on the 1st of November. So, and Sue will be doing a full handover with Diraj during November. And he came in last week and spent a day with us and met a lot of staff. So that worked really well as well. So you'll note we also had a youth justice inspection. The inspection took place on the week of the 17th of May. So I think I've been in post about 2.5 weeks by then, but it was published in August and was a very successful inspection, which we were really pleased with, both reflecting the work of the Youth Justice Service and of the partnership board, which is called the Youth Crime Prevention Executive Board. We've been doing lots of preparation for our SEND re-inspection, which we will be due any time from now. So that's work with our health colleagues, particularly in the CCG, and our community provider CLCH, as well as, of course, across the local authority. And we are also preparing for our annual engagement meeting with Ofsted, which is the next part in our ILACS cycle. So that's going to take place in November. We've obviously talked quite a bit about the work we've been doing around the DSG, rebalancing the DSG and preparing for the safety valve meeting, which is going to take place now in the second week in October, so on the 12th of October. So again, that's work with schools, with CCG colleagues, as well as reviewing our own systems as part of that process. We've completed the Children's Social Care Reorganization, which has reconfigured services to make more sense for the child's journey and to reduce the number of handoff points between across our system. So an example of that would be we've pulled into one service all our services for children who are in the care of the council, but also for our care experienced young people, our care leavers, all now in one service. And it's also allowed us to develop a social work academy for newly qualified social workers, and the inclusion of service manager posts. So a really clear career pathway for social workers in Merton, which will help us recruit and retain staff. We've also had to respond to the pressure within the system that we talked about last time, where we had higher caseloads, so more children coming in through the front door. So we've added some temporary staff to help reduce caseloads and to manage that. And we've seen those caseloads coming in the front door much more what we would expect on a sort of September. We always have a little bit of an increase in September. That's much more back to normal. So that's been very successful in managing those caseloads. And I've also been fully engaging with discussions around the changes in the health service. So the move to the integrated care system. So ensuring with other colleagues from Merton, that Merton as the place is considered as part of those proposals, and that children's needs are a key part of that planning. Yesterday evening we had the Health and Wellbeing Board and so wanted to reassure members of this panel that Start Well, which is our key part of that's Merton Health and Care Planning, that children are a key part of that, was discussed in detail around children's mental health, around our integrated services for children, and around our transition from children's to adults. So just a few things that have been going on over the last 5 months that hopefully you will have also picked up by the departmental update.
Thank you, Jane. Are there any questions from Jane? Omar, anyone else? Hayley? Right, Omar, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. They're all very short. My first question, and thank you for the report, is in relation to the race inequality in schools. You highlight all the good work that the forum has been doing. However, do we have more information of what the strategy is moving forward, given that this is a very current issue and will continue being a very important issue for the children in our borough? My second question is in relation to, I just write it down. It's in relation to the DFE meeting that's taken place and the deficit that the council has. What contingency does the council have if the government won't help us further?
So you'll be aware from the finance reports that have come through that there is contingency put aside, but obviously what we would be hoping is that what we're going to do is manage the system, rebalance the system, as I've referred to, and that there will be some support, as well as the council putting in resource to deal with that issue. In terms of the race equality in schools, I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth for that one, so she's closely involved with that.
Yes, so the challenge now is to maintain the momentum, as I think you're implying in your question. It remains a real priority for schools. So we do have the forum. It is also a priority for the schools partnership Attain, who have put some money into some of the events and activities that we'll be undertaking in the coming year, as well as some of the activities that we undertook last year. Moving forward, activity will continue to think about how leaders in schools lead on this issue. So we have just started a race identity and leadership program for a number of our schools. We are going to continue to support schools thinking about their curriculum. So the Black curriculum will be continuing to work with schools across the borough. We have got a pupil voice conference, pupil conference coming up in November. That is being planned by students from across our secondary schools for a wider group of students in our secondary schools. And I would also highlight the work that we want to continue to do around supporting schools and engaging with their communities on this issue.
I would just like, obviously, I'd like to highlight as well that obviously there's great work that's taken place that's potentially not being detailed. I think it would be, if possible, if we're able to kind of detail that moving forward, so then we can kind of demonstrate that work that we are doing, which, as you've kind of highlighted, is good, and we just need to make sure that we continue to do that. And I think this is a good way to kind of report what the strategy is as well.
Absolutely, we can do that. The forum has overseen the strategy and has identified the impact of what has happened so far. So I can definitely bring that to future meetings.
Hayley?
Yes, if I could just follow up to the response to, I've got two questions, Chair, if I may. I had one, but I just want to follow up to the response to Omar's question on the DSG, which is when he asked in terms of, what happens if the government doesn't help, and the responses in terms of from Jane was about being a rebalance and the system in place in terms of what you can do as a council to sort out the issue. So my second question to that is, why isn't that being done already? And my primary question, which is the second question, was in regard to the meeting, which is now on the 12th of October, which I understand was delayed. What do you think are the biggest challenges that Merton as a council will face as part of that meeting? Thank you, Chair.
Well, actually, quite a lot of the things that we're talking about are already in train, but they take quite a bit of time. So when you're planning new places, so for example, let's take the Watley Avenue, which we have planned and agreed. That's an 80 place, but you don't put 80 children all in one go. So it's going to actually take a number of years before the savings in relation to that are achieved. So I think the biggest challenge we've got is that we have quite a large deficit, that we have increasing numbers of children coming in, and we've got a big piece of work to do with our schools and our partners to bring that back in balance. So I think we've probably covered in a number of our meetings talking about the different groups of needs. So we knew we had a big increase in the number of children with autistic spectrum disorder, and so we're managing the increase in provision for that. What we're seeing now is an increase in the number of children with social, emotional, mental health needs. So we've responded very quickly to that and increased both our primary and our secondary provision for that. The other one of our biggest challenges is a challenge that is across Southwest London more generally, is that there's a really vibrant independent market that we probably started off with, but we did start off with only 3 special schools, and so a shortage of places. It's quite an aggressive independent market that markets to parents, and probably we have the issue that we have is not unique to us in that it works across Southwest London as a whole. So we also need to probably have more resource put in to manage those contracts, and so that's part of what the plan that we're planning for already, and that will be part of those discussions. So I guess the challenge of the meeting will be explaining the plan that we've got in place, how we're going to manage that, and part of that will also be the negotiation about the support that we would like, and some of that support might well be about how the DfE could support us with more a free school and speeding up that process. So the other issue is if you open a new school, and some of the boroughs around us have done that, it can take up to 5 years before that is agreed and put in place. So that's not going to be fast enough in terms of additional places we might need. So all of those things will be part of what we discuss and will be part of the challenge of the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Chair, if I may just follow up just one point, and I'd like to actually make this point for the record, because I do understand in terms of what Jane was just saying there in terms of plans taking place, but over 2 years ago, we did actually put forward a motion in full council for Watley Avenue to remain in education, which was actually voted down by yourself and your party in retrospect, for that site to actually be considered for housing, and that was over 2 years ago. I'd just like that point to be made for the record. Thank you.
Nick.
Cheers. Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I'd like to say that, you know, having worked in special needs in this borough for 30 years going on, amazing, that we've always had a very good attitude to special needs when counting the pennies, and we've managed to balance that very, very well with the needs, and I believe we're still doing that. But as Jane has pointed out, I mean, the reason for the imbalance is the amount of children that we've got coming into the service at the moment. With that in mind, can the officers think of any good reason why, in reply to Omar Bush's question about what if the government refused, why would the government refuse to give us the money we need?
Well, so we need to go into this meeting as a negotiation. So I guess it would be if they didn't think our plans were strong enough, if they didn't think it was, or I mean, at that negotiation point, the council also has to make a decision whether they want to continue with that discussion, depending what is being demanded of the council in terms of what they will put in. So it is a negotiation, and we need to go and start that process, and then come back and talk to you about what that looks like in terms of what the offer will be on both sides.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for your report. On page 39, 2.48, I'd like to know what was the outcome of the conference that was held, and what have we all learned from it, and what will be taken forward from the conference?
So it was, as I have highlighted in the report, a very successful conference. We had very strong turnout from Merton schools. I think to say what we have learnt, what the impact of it has been, I think on the day, the inspiration that we gained as educational professionals from the people who were able to present cannot be underestimated. We learnt a lot more around the data from Professor Steve Strand, enabling us to think more forensically about the performance, underperformance in some cases of children from certain ethnic groups. The work, the input that we had from our colleagues in the educational psychology service was very good at sort of facilitating people's thinking about how they want to take forward in individual schools. We also heard, I think I have mentioned it here, from Afua Hirsch, who is an author and broadcaster. Some of you may know of her work. She's a Guardian journalist, but she has also written a book, Brit-ish, and the ish is in parenthesis afterwards. She is a Merton, ex-Merton student, and it was wonderful to hear from her. She was in conversation with our own Keith Shipman, reflecting on her own experiences, reflecting on what we could think about as an education system in Merton, about how we could be doing things differently. And we were lucky enough to be able to record that, and that has been shared more widely with our wider council officers. Next steps are through our forum, or overseen by our forum, and for schools to take those next steps forward. And I reflected also, now it is about maintaining energies and focus and momentum. And I strongly believe that that is there in Merton schools.
Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'd like to change direction here a bit. On 2.49 and climate change. Now, I remember mentioning 2 or 3 years ago about gas boilers being phased out, and they certainly aren't placed in any new developments that I know of. And instead of our school system repairing or replacing gas boilers, would it not be in our long-term benefit to change all these gas appliances to electric. And I know it will be a huge cost, but it'll be even more expensive if we don't do it. And school buildings, ordinary homes balk at the idea of solar panels, but schools have the ability to actually put solar panels on the roofs to feed these things, or even move a bit further onto hydrogen-based. I know that's very new, but my brother-in-law has been driving a hydrogen-based vehicle for 2 years, and it's non-polluting. Are we going to go in this direction, or are we going to just bury our heads in the sand and keep going with the system we've got? Thank you.
You invited me to go, didn't you? Yeah, so I mean, in response to that, I mean, clearly the council's declared its climate emergency, and there is a requirement. Clearly, what you're asking for comes with an absolutely huge bill. If you're going to replace boilers with air heat pumps, it's a very technical thing. You have to improve insulation massively with it. So they are really, really big projects. Some money is starting to flow from government for it, and it is something we looked at. We have actually got the money for Whatley Avenue from a government bid we made a few months ago. So Whatley Avenue will have what you're saying, and it's something that's a good time to do it while the building's empty. So we will be doing that as part of that work. Well, that's what the bid provides for us. We are starting to look at for schools. Could it be a massive program? Because of all the insulation that goes with it. So that is something we're progressing, but only at the very early stages. And I am a bit nervous because it does put up utility bills quite a lot for schools in the short term, because electricity at the moment is more expensive than gas. But it is something that we are working with colleagues on.
May I just make a comment there, Chair?
Stu.
I understand all that, because I've been working in building industry for 56 years, but think of the consequences for not doing it to our grandchildren, my grandchildren, other people's grandchildren.
Can I just come in? I would agree with what Dennis is saying, but I agree with what you're saying, because there's so many options coming out and we really don't know which one is going to be the best of the selection. I can't remember all the names, like the hydrogen one. There's the air withdrawal one and the one underground. And they're all very expensive. So I think it's something we can't rush into, but it's something we've got to think of building into the plans.
I mean, it's something that's, you know, so many millions of pounds for our school buildings to do that. And so clearly it needs government funding, which is flowing in a small extent for some initial Pathfinder projects. But we will obviously need to watch and look at opportunities, yeah, as that comes. But yeah, I don't think Merton could afford to do that with our current council tax.
Russell, please.
Thank you. I was just going to add to what Dennis has said. Basically, we had a bloke come round yesterday to look at the gas meter or the gas boiler and replace it. And replacing after 7 years, you get the money back. That's resident though. So, I mean, obviously, residential homes are more warmer than schools, and I could see the problem. But by 2025, the boiler will have to go anyway. So, and there is government money available. So could you look at it, please?
Yeah, point taken. The other thing I didn't mention, Dennis, in terms of solar panels, I mean, we have, according to our client people, almost exhausted how many solar panels we put in. A lot of our schools, so almost all our south-facing roofs have got solar panels already, apart from a small number that for whatever reason were being difficult but could certainly be gone back on. Yeah, because there is a payback on that.
Ask relating onto that, some of our schools that are academies, do they still pay you? Because Merton did pay for those solar panels to go on the roofs of school, getting the feedback. Do you still get it from schools that no longer borough schools.
Yeah, don't worry. When they converted, we made sure that was written in the agreement. Yeah. Wouldn't miss that one.
Pleased to hear that. Nick?
Two things, and sorry, both of them statements rather than questions. As far as gas via electricity, apparently the free market is working very hard at the moment to make sure that gas is more expensive than electric. Certainly in this country, at least. The thing I was going to say relates more to what Dennis was saying. I mean, and it is, I'm afraid, a statement rather than a question. I mean, if the government is balking at the idea of paying for our children with special needs to be educated, how likely is it that they're going to actually pay for it to get to go to address climate change in our schools, given the extremely large cost, comparatively large cost that would be? I'm not really expecting an answer to that.
Tom, did you want to come back on that at all or not? Or Jane or Elizabeth? No, right.
Definitely a political one, not for me to answer.
Just got one question. A lot of them being covered, and it's great the questions people are asking you. On page 33, 2.19, when you talk about dealing with issues, and the comment is good sense of our strengths, including, and the bottom bullet point on that page, reducing numbers of children with CP plans. I am always very concerned about that, because I don't think the priority should be necessarily to reduce them, because I think some safeguarding figures that were out recently was stating that every, is it 80 seconds, county lines recruit a child in this country. It is quite horrific, and to me that comes under child protection area 2. So I think I understand you want to be efficient with everything, and that is excellent, but I would be concerned that no child is overlooked when really they do need the authority's support.
So I'll let Sue answer this in a bit more detail, but it's about ensuring whether those children, whether a child protection plan is the right plan for them.
Yeah, so the reason why we like to see reducing child protection plans is in the belief and the hope that we're getting it right earlier, and so that we're doing preventive work and early help work and work at child in need, which means that we've put resources in and helped families before they get to the point of needing child protection plans. So it isn't that we won't be supporting children who are vulnerable or at risk, but it will hopefully mean that we're doing it further down the line, so that we can do that with consent, by working with families, by offering early help, early support and child in need work.
Very much, and that's all commendable, and I agree with it completely, but it is still some who come off a child protection plan need to come back on it, and as picking them, monitoring them when they're young and supporting them when they're young is the best way forward. But it's that cyclical approach where it laps back again, and through adolescence it certainly does too, as long as that isn't a priority on top of caring for our children. And you've just qualified that.
Yeah. And when I talk about early help, I mean early help in the problem, not early help in the life of the child. So you can do early help when somebody is 15 or 16, but when the problem is emerging. But I totally agree with you. We need to carefully monitor that we are not taking children off plans too soon, which is why we scrutinise any re-referrals or children who come back on a plan for a second time, which is, is always a focus of attention. But it usually means that you are doing a good job if you are seeing less children on plans, because it hopefully shows that you are putting services in earlier.
Very much, because I don't necessarily want that one as a target, but people don't agree with me and I accept that. But as long as, it's the children's needs first. Thank you very much. I think that's the last of the questions. And Jane, Could I ask you, I hope I'm speaking on behalf of everyone, to pass on our congratulations to the Youth Justice Service on their really very, very good, not totally outstanding altogether, Ofsted, and the fact that you've already dealt with one of the inspectorate's recommendations that could do with it being improved, linking to data. That's great. Thank you very much. If we could move now to Cabinet members' priorities, please, Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And there's three main areas that I wanted to highlight as my priorities, and happy to take questions on. I think it's been brilliant questions so far tonight, and keen to continue the conversation. Two of my areas of priorities are ones that we've already spoken about quite a lot. So that's SEND, and it's our provision for pupils with special educational needs, and it's linked to the DSG. Secondly, pupil places. And thirdly, more broadly, my priority is getting back our focus on the vulnerable children, which we were starting to talk about there in that conversation. But going in order, yes, SEND and the DSG, I think we've talked about quite a lot already. The focus has to be on, as Jane said, entering that negotiation with a plan that we think is feasible, but also delivers what we want to deliver for our children and young people and families, and coming to an arrangement which is sustainable for us, for the children, and for the system. So there'll be a lot of continued focus on that. But I'm really pleased about the progress that we have made in terms of the expansion, in terms of the opening of Whatley. Hayley raised the point earlier about them making the case for that previously, that there's been I don't think there's been any delay caused by us not having passed that vote for the use of Whatley, because we had to first do the work about who the provider for any additional special school or extension of a special school would be. And that had to come first, and that work with Melrose happened, and then we were able to identify that Whatley was the appropriate site for it. And it was only, I mean, a year ago that site was still being used by a secondary school, and this time next year it will be open for a special school. So I'm really proud of the team's work on moving forward with that. Secondly, pupil places, we've talked about at length, so I won't say much more other than to say this is not a Merton issue, this is a London issue. Other London Labour leaders I know are really, really worried about this, as am I. We've had other boroughs very nearby who already had to start to close schools, and as we've been clear, we don't want to do that. So we as Labour Cabinet leads across London have written to the new Secretary of State, Nazim Zahawi, talking to him about how we need some urgent attention on this, and because obviously you've all rightly identified there are huge budgetary issues for individual schools if we don't address this. Thirdly, yeah, vulnerable children. So we're just talking about some of our kind of most vulnerable children, those who are put onto a child protection plan, and the work to make sure that we're putting the right children there. I think more broadly, I'm really happy about where we've got to with the restructure, and it's about making sure that the new structured system does provide the right care for the right children at the right time. But I'm also keen to think about what more we can do as a council to support some of our really most vulnerable young people, so those in care and care leavers. And I hope that some of you will be coming to the corporate parenting training tomorrow night, so you can learn more about that and kind of join in that conversation. Beyond those young people, those who have got mental health problems continue to be an absolute concern for me and for officers, and thankfully also for health partners. Jane mentioned the workshops that have been going on to inform the local health and care plan. And in those, the kind of concerns about mental health have been absolutely consistent from everybody attending. So now we need to go beyond talk to kind of what are we going to do? And we're talking not just about, well, there's two areas. There's a kind of general increase in stress and anxiety and things that affect children's and young people's well-being. But they're also talking about some really quite seriously unwell children with kind of suicide ideation and eating disorders, and rising numbers of those, and the demand that is placing on kind of acute beds and hospital services. And there's, again, a national issue of shortage of provision at that sharp end. We've talked about youth justice, and we're really proud to work with those. The other vulnerable group that we kind of don't talk about enough, which is kind of poor kids more generally. In COVID, we saw became really clear, well, what was clear to everybody already working in the sector was, you know, if you grow up in a poor household, you have a rougher time, and COVID's really brought that to the floor. We need to continue our focus supporting our schools to improve their performance so that we narrow that attainment gap between poorer pupils and their peers. And we as a council need to be doing everything we can to support those families. So I'm proud of the work that we did over the summer on the holiday activities and food programme, and the additional funding that we as a council put into providing vouchers for families who are eligible for free school meals. I've talked at length, but those are my kind of 3 broad areas of priorities, and happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has questions for Ellie? Omar?
Thank you very much for the update. You briefly touched on mental health and well-being, and I obviously am happy to hear that that is one of your core focuses as cabinet member. What more can the council do, and what more can you do as cabinet member to support children and young people who are having these issues with mental health and well-being? As you highlighted yourself, it's a very topical issue, and it's something that's impacting a lot of people, especially with the influence of social media and kind of going through the COVID pandemic. So yeah, I'd like to kind of hear more on that.
Thank you, Councillor. And that's a really good question. And part of the challenge is, we can't do it on our own, and it has to be a multi-partner, sorry, instinctively going into the language, multi-partners. So, what we can do is we can support the children and young people that are directly in our care. We can work with schools to support the provision that they're doing, like the things like Trailblazers, where we've got mental health services being provided directly in schools. But then there's a whole chunk that we as a council are not responsible for. And that's where sometimes there's difficulties, is getting the right, like I say, kind of acute ongoing mental health support for those children. And there I think it is about lobbying and bashing some heads together and getting the right people in the room. Like I say, well, I was just really happy that it came through so strongly from all the different partners. So the workshops around the local health care plan refresh came from the health sector, but also voluntary sector and also school sector and officers, and everybody was kind of aware that this is what we need to do more work on. So I don't think I'm giving you any easy answers there, and I'm being honest about where our kind of limitations are, but it is about doing the support that we can do through the levers that we have, and then lobbying for more for those most vulnerable.
I think it's definitely an area where potentially we kind of need a strategy moving forwards, because I can see this area further expanding and growing and being more of an issue as we go forward. So I think as a council, we should have some sort of strategy. And I appreciate the challenges that are in place with funding and everything else. However, I think this is an important area that we should. And as I said, it's one of your priorities that you've kind of highlighted tonight as well, which I'm very happy with. And I think a bit more focus from all of us on that, I think, is always beneficial.
I suppose just to come back on that, yeah, so mental health, like I say, chunks of it will be covered by health aspects, bits by our aspects. Maybe it is something that we should draw out in the future to be clear about kind of where the responsibilities lie and what more is going on.
I think that'd be beneficial.
Does anyone else have any questions? Joan?
Thank you for your update. I just want to, can you please update us on recent recruitment for foster carers? Also, what support are given to young people who move into semi-independent living? Because I have a great concern about that, and I feel like we need to do a bit more to support those young people who move into semi-independent living, age group between 18 to 27.
I'll say something briefly and then I might hand over to Sue, but I'm very happy to pick that up more broadly with you. But yeah, foster care recruitment is an absolutely huge challenge, and one of the things that I want to potentially talk about tomorrow and in the future is getting more kind of councillor support for how we can increase the numbers. You'll see from the performance review that we are struggling with numbers, and we do need more foster carers. On the particular semi-independent living point, I don't know if you have anything to say, Sue, or if it's something we can pick up outside the meeting.
I think we're doing quite well, really, in terms of recruiting foster carers, given the 18 months that we've just been through. It has been very difficult, but we have, we're in the process of taking a number of our own carers through assessment now for approval. So I don't think it's a grim picture by any means. It has been a difficult 18 months, as I've said. And I think you'll see the numbers in the next report reflect the ones that are coming through at the moment. So we're in the middle of assessing. So although we've only actually recruited one, there are a high number of people in the system who have not yet been approved. So that's the first point. We've also invested in the Mockingbird project, which I don't know if any of you know about, but I'm guessing it's been discussed here before, which is, it's a really good program where our own foster carers, in-house foster carers, act as an extended family. So they support each other, and the children that they care for almost become cousins to each other. So it kind of reflects a really good extended family. And you turn to those people when you're struggling, and you turn to those people for help and support. And we have that pod live now, and that's very successful. And hopefully going forward, we can get the carers that are in the Mockingbird program to recruit more, because word of mouth is the best way. And supporting our carers, giving them good training, including them in decisions about children, making them feel valued is the best way to retain and recruit. So I think we'll see an improving picture now we're out of lockdown, and we can actually engage with carers more. But we will always need more. We want our children to be cared for in families. In Merton, we don't want to send them miles away from home, so that there will always be more. And in terms of the semi-independent living, we know that there needs to be more done about good choice of homes that make our young people feel safe, that make them feel that this is a place where they can build a home, and that semi-independent living is a stepping stone to that. Do you have any specific issues that you're worried about? Or, I mean, obviously all our children would have a plan. They would be supported in that setting. We would hold that setting to account to make sure that it was safe, to make sure they were meeting the needs of young people. And we would, monitor it carefully. But the truth is, we need more. We need better choice. We need more of those types of placement. Is this something?
Yeah, I do, and I will speak to Haley, on a different term, at a different time, because I mean, in my ward, Palazzil, I've experienced quite a few issues, but as I say, I'll speak to Haley about it.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Is no more questions? Right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the performance managing report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Carl Mittelstadt, the Head of Performance Policy and Partnerships for the London Borough of Merton. I think most people do know me. You'll be familiar with this report. This is the overview of performance indicators and a cover report which outlines any indicators that may be showing a red rating. Diving straight in then into section 2, indicator number 2 is the percentage of single assessments authorised within 45 days. So these are those children who come to the attention of children's social care, are referred for an assessment, and there's a statutory 45-day limit on undertaking these assessments. I think I'm saying almost for the first time, or very rarely in my 2 years here, is this indicator shown as a red. We have a very high completion rate, and we set ourselves a very high target of 90%, which is above national and regional averages. It has slipped slightly under that percentage, but this is why we are reporting it as red. But I do want to caveat that, saying not only have we seen, and today we're discussing the latest performance reports, and it's already already gone back into the green area. We were expecting that to happen after the summer months. The other two indicators that are currently showing red are the average number of weeks taken to complete care proceedings. I think that members of this committee will be familiar that this is a standing item that is that we do report as red, and in many ways we are sort of beholden to timescales also imposed by the courts, and certainly COVID was also a factor. The other thing that impacts on numbers in Merton is the relatively small numbers that we initiate care proceedings for, which means a family group maybe of a number of siblings can impact on the percentage. And finally, we've already talked about the number of in-house foster carers. I think the number reported here as one masks the hard work that has been going on behind the scenes. There's, I think there's in excess of 10 foster carers that are undergoing the assessment, and we would certainly be confident in saying that those numbers should be looking up next time we come to reports. But nevertheless, it is certainly an area we want to be keeping our eyes on. And I will leave it there for, oh, I do know, so I do want to quickly draw people's attention to indicator 19 and 20, which I've been unable to report this time, unfortunately. We discovered an error in our automated calculations, which didn't match up with our manual calculations. So this is sort of something that's sort of in the back end really of some of the performance reporting. We weren't able to rectify the figures in time for today's scrutiny, and I took the decision to, in consultation with Jane, to not report today, but to come back once we have rectified the problem. So rather that risk misleading, for now, I just need to say, actually, I can't report on this for now. What we do know, we obviously do know where our looked after our children in care are. We review placement stability as a matter of course. This is merely that we can't report on it. Operationally, we certainly have assurances that this isn't an issue in operations. I'll stop there and open it up for any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Carl?
Can I just add something to the percentage of single assessments that are slipped to slightly below 45 days? We scrutinise very carefully any of the plans that went over, and I have assured myself personally that many of those cases were purposeful delay. So, for example, there's one family who were in the middle of a bereavement, and so we didn't progress that assessment because they were obviously not able to take part in it. It was delayed and therefore late. There was another where we were waiting for information from an absent father so that we could complete the assessments. So I suppose I just wanted to assure you that this wasn't just people not having done it. There's good reason why, and we scrutinise very carefully any plans that go over the time. So.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions? Carl, thank you very much for the update. And it is interesting to see. It's good that there are only a few that occasionally slip into red, and some it's very difficult to get out, but it's to deal with issues correctly rather than being happy with a red or a green box. So that's the most important thing, that they're dealt with accurately and recorded accurately. So thank you very much. Our last item is the work programme. Has everybody looked at the work programme and agree with it? Agreed. And you know what's coming up next time. Are there any questions or queries from anybody? Nick?
Not a question or a query, Sally, but Chair, but as we're coming to the end of the meeting, you complimented everybody else on getting their new positions. Can we just compliment you on getting to yours? Because I think you've done a fantastic job this evening. Thank you.
I find it very difficult, the hybrid, I really do. And I'm sorry I tried to get Carl to sort out the wrong item agenda. But yes, but thank you. It's really good to have the thorough questions that are coming from everyone in this room. Thank you. So.
Question about task groups, and I mean, I wasn't at the last meeting, admittedly, so I don't know what happened, but we had a meeting in May, that discussed various items that this committee was going to look at during the year, and they only seem to be in written reports. Are we not holding a task group then? I mean, Stella, probably.
Chair, can I report that we'll be doing it? The panel agreed to do a task group on digital technology in the classroom. We're just recruiting members for that, and it will start work shortly, picking up the task group that began before the pandemic.
For something, it wasn't in the book I looked at.
I think the issue is that normally task work doesn't go in the work programme, does it? But it is recorded each time.
No, but there are issues that the task group has to do. I mean, the task group has to be agreed by this committee and also go from this committee in some at the end of it. So the committee needs to know that it's going ahead. That's basically all I wanted to say, was there should be an item that says task group and it's going ahead, and that's it.
Thank you, Russell. It's not that it's COVID has caused a big hiccup because you weren't able to get into schools or do anything like that. But I'll liaise with Stella to make sure that's on target. Omar.
Thank you, Chair. In Councillor Holmes's absence, I will raise this one point that he does raise, and it's in relation to we don't meet often, and the agenda, I know, is sometimes busy, but I do feel that even with tonight's agenda, there could have potentially been a few more items added onto it. And I think that's something that we do need to kind of consider, especially for the work programme, that we don't meet often. It's always good to scrutinise and have these discussions that are very important to have during these meetings. So I'm always of the opinion that we should potentially add more where possible.
I've only just come back to being chair, but I thought one of the theories was that to do something really thoroughly, than do more items, perhaps superficially. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is nice if we can give an item agenda plenty of time for everyone to have the opportunity to ask questions. But that's not to say we can't discuss that and take on board yours and Councillor Holmes' suggestion. Thank you.
I agree with you entirely, Chair. It certainly worked in my time doing it your way.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for everyone on Zoom. I'm sorry that I don't always notice you as soon as you want to speak, and thank you for being tolerant with me. Thank you to everyone for coming. Have a lovely journey.